Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues. With this video, we'll be discussing my thoughts on episode 12 of the anime series Show by Rock. For all intents and purposes, the series finale. And as finales go, I mean, this was somewhat of a mixed bag, I have to say. And this is always going to be the case more times than not when it comes to an anime series. You know, the ending just felt like there was so much going on and so much they had to fit together. And it just wasn't quite, it was a little clunky. It wasn't quite as fluid as I wish it would have been when compared to the rest of the series. The series on whole, I felt was much better paced than just the singular standalone finale episode. And that is largely to do with, like, we have so many false endings. We begin with, you know, picking up with that revelation of Shien's that Rosia and, you know, pretty much all of Crista are contained within this dark monster, this giant hulking moth-like monster. And there's a point where Dagger, you know, sort of re-transfixes them under his power to go pointedly towards Shien, and once again Dayu comes in her cat-like form, that whatever it is, suit of armor, whatever you want to call it, to hold this monster at bay. And it's through Shien's, you know, sort of sheer force of will and talent they break Crista free. And then we have this like down lull moment where it's just the realization of those girls, Rosia in particular, what led them to this, and the aftermath, and the apologies are exchanged. And as we see, much as I speculated, Angelica and Maple have gone to break free Grateful King of Dagger's tower, and that's all insane and everything. And then there are a couple sequences where, you know, it's very much kind of contained to an RPG aesthetic. When you ever get to the final boss of an RPG, usually you have multiple layers of that final boss you have to get through. They will evolve and transform and mutate, and you have different incarnations of the same final boss. And that's kind of what is happening with Dagger here. Once he realizes his monster's destroyed, he is now mutating himself, and, you know, he strings everybody up in webs at one point. Grateful King comes out and saves Shien at the last minute when she's about to bow down to Dagger and, you know, sort of succumb to the darkness. And you get to the point where this has happened a couple of times, and then Grateful King intervenes and is going to forcibly send Shien home. She isn't even going to be able to say goodbye to her friends of Plasmagica and everything, everyone she has met. And it's a matter of suddenly you realize, or at least Shien realizes, even with everything she's gone through, there's still been that underridden fear within her that she needs to overcome. And so, very much pointedly to that notion, she becomes literally angelic. The angel wings, you know, grow out from her back, and she overpowers this now third or fourth modification monster version of Dagger Morse and everything. And she sort of uses, like, the Mr. Berry guitar strings to fire a heart arrow into him and destroys him. And it's interesting to see the aftermath of that. I was wondering if he would have sort of a clarity moment where he would become undark, if you will. And of course he ends up being like a little sperm ball or whatever. It's just, you have Crow picking him up and poking at him, and then he like burps in his face and bounces off and everything. And I did think it was cool that you have, basically, in the sort of fruition of this, you have everyone's heartfelt goodbyes, because Shien is going to be going home, and I wondered all through the course of the series, would it come full circle, and would she go home? And as soon as that notion cropped into my mind in this episode that yes, she would be going home, there was one sort of, you know, pinpointed factor in my mind that would make this finale the saving grace of good or bad, or good or, you know, tepid, just kind of okay, an ending. And I didn't know if they were going to touch upon this. Of course, because you have those heartfelt goodbyes and you have this great heartening moment, they're all teary-eyed, and I'm getting a little misty-eyed because it's, you know, we've all gone through that where you spend time with friends and then you have to, like, leave for summer camp, or you meet them at summer camp and you have to go home, and vice versa, and all these different things where you have to leave these friends that you've spent so much time with and bonded with and everything. And even though they are going to be not seeing each other again, they'll always be friends. And how do they encapsulate that notion? Choo Choo has these guitar picks, all four of which, when, you know, sort of brought together, form a heart, the symbol of Plasmagica and everything like that. And I really enjoyed that. And I thought for the most part, I mean, the ending was satisfactory. It wasn't exemplary. It wasn't, uber great. It was okay. It was an okay ending. And of course, we have Plasmagica getting back on the stage one final time. The foursome that has been struggling time and time again to get to Midi City, they're finally there. They haven't missed this concert. They're happy about that. Grateful King's going to be playing. Crow is just losing the ape guano over this. And the entirety of Shingen Crimsons is poking fun at him for that. And, you see Rome giving the thumbs up to Shuzo. So, there's not going to be as much bad blood there and everything. And you kind of get the sense that Rome sees it from his perspective now, how there is value even in what Shuzo has been doing, and or maybe I'm reading too much into that, but in any case, I like that we end with this grand spectacle of everyone on stage and the music playing. But again, where was that final decisive moment that was going to make it just impactful? And we finally get to that post-credits, the final scene. It's less than a minute long, or maybe about a minute long, where Xian is right back where the series began. She's in school, and she's trying to work up the courage to go in and introduce herself to the girls in the band, this little rock group, whatever it is. And I almost, began to suspect, was this going to end up being everyone from the Midi City, music environment, whatever, maybe they had transported there. But of course, I wasn't, holding my breath for that. But I was like, please let this end with the learning curve coming to its natural end, with Xian having the courage to go in and introduce herself, because she faltered at the start of the series, just before all of this whirlwind of adventure, that was the entirety of the series, comprised of the entirety of it, before all of that began. And so to not have her finally get to that point where she could enter that room and she could introduce herself and she could seek that passion of performing and learning to play music and playing in an ensemble, all the things she learned to do within that music environment, it would have been a disservice if they hadn't done so. And to my relief and just penultimate satisfaction, I was ear to ear grinning. She practices what she's going to say. She's going to knock on the door. She hesitates. And then, boom, she opens it and blasts in and says the introduction. And then, boom, we're done with the series. And it was that moment alone. I came through the course of the entirety of the series. I saw all of these characters grow and evolve. And there was so much great characterization and story arcs building to that moment. And that crescendoous moment was what made this finale episode worth a damn for me. I enjoyed it. But it was just, meh, okay, overall, compared to the entirety of the series, which was stellar. I have little to nothing to say about it, critical-wise, negative-wise. But I would have if they hadn't brought it full circle, and they did. And it was just hell yes. Xian evolved. She thoroughly evolved. A lot of these characters had an evolution, had a story arc, and music and the love of music, all of that was at the center of the idea that you can use that to fuel your courage. You can use that to allay your fear. And at the center of that was Xian herself. This journey was all about her. Even though we had these little, tapering off side stories and we were following other characters and getting to know them. I mean, they were all part of the grand scheme of things, but at the center was always Xian. Whether it be because that's the sole focus Dagger had put on her, or whether her own need to overcome her fears, as we find in this finale, that was what it was all about at the end. And she did so. And for her doing so, it's it just made me that much happier. The finale episode was good. As I say, I will keep reiterating, it was good. It wasn't stellar. That moment put it over the top. That final moment, that final scene where Xian came clean with her own fears, faced them, confronted them, went through that door, introduced herself, and decided to challenge her now real life again, now that she's back in the real world, to challenge those fears and push beyond them. No better message can you end the series with. And overall, I mean, the series, I absolutely loved it. From the very beginning, one of the chief things I was saying was I loved the animation, the merging between the 2D and the 3D, all the way up to this final episode. I absolutely loved it. It never felt jarring or like one didn't complement the other. They were well fitted together all the way through. I loved all of the, you know, very well placed and paced drama and comedy and, you know, all these things. Just, it was so pitch perfect through the course of it. And I will say, you know, as a finale goes, if you didn't have that final scene, it would have faltered, to my estimation, to a point, because this finale, again, it was a little bit clunky in places, and it kind of felt like not as fluid as the rest of the series, the majority of the series, at least to me, my perspective. You don't have to agree with it. You can let me know in the comments below whether you do or not, or whether you know, do have criticisms of the series overall and everything like that. But for me, just sitting back and enjoying this, I got much more characterization than I ever would have expected out of this series. I felt for the characters. I could relate to some of them. I got just, you know, laughs and laughs out of a lot of them, especially, you know, Shingeki Crimsons and everything. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that they weren't just comic relief. They actually had a story arc of their own to go through. And each individually as well as together, you know. And we see that with a lot of these characters. They have individual arcs, but then they also have these unification arcs where it's about all of them coming together. Plasmagica being the centermost, but you have Shingeki Crimsons, you have all these other characters, Krista in their own way. And that's kind of why I feel like they touched upon, you know, they had that lull in this finale episode, because you needed to kind of have that awareness. You didn't want to just have Krista suddenly be okay, but we don't get any follow-up, you know, as far as that. Rosia realizes what she's done and all the trouble she's caused, and she does. She admits to that, right to Xian. She apologizes to her pointedly. She apologizes to her fellow bandmates and is glad that they are okay. And, you know, I mean, like I say, everybody had some integral role in this story. There wasn't a wasted moment as far as, you know, somebody being introduced and not amounting to something. I mean, even Sugihagi, the character who was like one of the first ones we find out, that distinction, that link between Dark Monster and these musicians, how that could be brought together, that was high awareness, you know, through the course of the series that character gave us. And so everybody who was in this series was well plotted and had a story arc, whether, you know, grand or on a small scale. They made a point by the end. They played into the story by the end with a purpose. And again, just the idea that she learned to overcome her own fear by the end of this series through the course of it, and finally walked through that door. Everything else you could say about the finale, even if it was dissatisfying to a degree, and I don't think it was dissatisfying wholly, somewhat maybe for me personally, that final scene, as I said, put it over the top and made me appreciate the entirety of this series that much more, because that's what it all came back to, and that was the most pinnacle important moment for that character. Remember, all of this was happening in sort of an alternate dimension or universe, and she would have to inevitably go back to her real world. And everything she experienced here, if she hadn't taken something back with her to the real world from all of that, what would the point have been? And there was a thorough point by the end. So that's pretty much all I can say on the series as a whole and this finale episode for it. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of this finale episode of Show by Rock, if you've seen it, and your thoughts overall. Give me sort of a nutshell, you know, interpretation of what you thought of the series from beginning to end, and whether you thought it was predictable or it didn't hold up, you know, those characterization and story arc elements like I am so praising. Whether you agree with me or you don't, I love having the conversation with you guys in the comments. So I'd love to hear from you, and otherwise that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.